Welcome to Twisted Truths, where betrayal meets brutal payback, and where the most unexpected twists expose what people are really capable of. This story isn't just shocking, it's personal. My name is Stephen Marlowe, and I was 39 years old the day I was fired from the company I helped build. 3 years earlier, I was sitting on the dusty floor of a rented warehouse in Raleigh, eating cold pizza off a cardboard box, writing back-end code on a laptop that could barely run it. The startup had no name, no funding, and no customers, just two founders, Jacob and Peter, with a bold idea, and me, the guy who made that idea real. I built the entire infrastructure. Every line of back-end code, every workaround, every fragile but effective deployment system, it all came from my sleepless nights and relentless belief in what we were doing. Back then, they called me the heartbeat of the company. But things change. They brought in a new director of operations, Wesley Grant, suit, MBA, silver tongue. He talked in buzzwords, walked like he owned the place, and within months, the board fell for him. They called it fresh leadership. I called it the beginning of the end. At first, he was all smiles and praise, telling me I was the backbone, that he respected the work I'd done. But slowly, meetings started happening without me. System upgrades were decided by kids who hadn't even debugged a live server crash. And Wesley? He stopped calling me by name. I became legacy staff. Then came the quarterly meeting. Wesley stood at the head of the long glass table, a tablet in hand, presenting projections and flashy restructuring charts. He didn't even look at me when he said it. Stephen's work has been adequate. But we need thinkers who can evolve. Adequate. That word hit harder than any insult. I'd carried this company through 3 all-nighters in 1 week, rebuilt the platform after a critical data loss, and held my own when venture capital firms wanted proof our tech was more than vaporware. I didn't argue. I nodded like a good soldier. But inside, something cracked. When I walked out of that meeting, I didn't go home. I went to my office, locked the door, and opened the contract I'd signed 3 years ago. And that's when I remembered, really remembered, what I'd put in there. There was a clause. A rare one. One that Jacob had agreed to back when I was working for equity alone. I retained IP rights over certain deployment tools and encryption keys I had developed independently. Back then, it was a gesture of goodwill. Now, it was leverage. But I wasn't planning revenge. Not yet. Then, a week before the big product launch, I got the email. Your position has been eliminated, effective immediately. Please coordinate with HR. No warning. No meeting. Just a boilerplate note. I sat in my car staring at it for 20 minutes. 3 years, and I was tossed out like a broken mousepad. And then, on the same day, I got the announcement. Join us to celebrate the launch of our revolutionary platform. The one I had built. From scratch. That's when I knew. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a declaration. Wesley wanted to erase me. So I made a decision. If he wanted to celebrate a future without me, then he was going to get a very real taste of what that future looked like. The day after I was fired, I didn't get out of bed. Not out of sadness. Out of shock. I had spent over 1,100 days pouring my soul into Christress Global. Missed birthdays. Lost sleep. Skipped holidays. I had a drawer full of ramen noodles and protein bars from nights I couldn't be bothered to leave my desk. I gave everything. And now I was nothing. I stared at the ceiling in my apartment, the silence deafening. My work phone was dead. My inbox, locked. My access, revoked. But the cruelest part? Nobody from the company called to check on me. Not Jacob. Not Peter. Not even the interns I used to mentor. I had been erased. Quietly. Efficiently. Like a forgotten line of deprecated code. The next few days were a blur. My dad called. He still thought I was giving a keynote at the launch. I couldn't tell him the truth. Not yet. He spent 40 years laying concrete with cracked hands and a busted spine and still told me, build something real, son. I thought I had. But what I built, Wesley stole. And now he was planning to take credit for it, live, in front of 500 investors and tech journalists. The press release made it official. Christensen Global was launching their new, lightning-fast proprietary platform, complete with live demos, speeches, and a toast to visionary leadership. My name was nowhere. It burned. I went back to the contract that night. Not out of bitterness, but because I needed to remind myself that I had mattered. That my work was real. That the sleepless nights hadn't been in vain. And that's when I saw it again. Section 17, Clause C. Developer retains full intellectual property rights over any independent encryption algorithms, deployment tools, or server-side security layers authored prior to or outside the scope of employment, unless otherwise waived in writing. I hadn't waived anything. And the core infrastructure, the real lifeblood of Christensen Global. It ran on those tools. I still owned the lock. And Wesley had just fired the only one who knew where the keys were. But even knowing that, I didn't feel powerful. I felt broken. Like I'd been cheated out of something sacred. Not just a job, but recognition. Respect. The quiet dignity that comes from being seen. That was the real wound. The next morning, I sat at the coffee shop where I used to meet Jacob in the early days. It was still there. Same chipped tables. Same burnt espresso. But now, it felt haunted. I remember staring at the empty seat across from me, where he used to dream out loud about the company we were building, and wondering when exactly he stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as expendable. That night, I opened a fresh terminal window. Not to destroy. But to document. Everything. 3 years of architecture. Notes. Schematics. Patch notes. Optimization logs. I cataloged every decision I'd made, every workaround that saved their skin, every firewall rule that protected client data, every checksum routine that kept the system from collapsing under load. It took hours. But when I finished, I realized something. They didn't even understand the machine they were about to showcase. They were going to run a recorded demo on a sandbox environment and pretend it was live. Why? Because the production servers required a custom deployment key, one they didn't have, because I had built the generator using an algorithm I never shared. Wesley didn't just fire a senior engineer. He fired the only person who could actually launch the platform. And now, 5 days before the biggest night of his career, he was about to find out what a real crash looked like. You know that moment when something shifts in your gut? When the pain doesn't fade, but it hardens into purpose? That moment hit me 2 days after I was fired. I was rereading the documentation for the encryption system I'd built during the company's scrappiest days. The deployment key generator, the one I created on a battered Lenovo in my apartment, back before the company had money for servers, was still mine. And not just legally. Functionally. There was no way around it. The company's core platform, the crown jewel Wesley was preparing to parade in front of the world, could not deploy without that key. And no one else knew how it worked. No one. I had layered the security myself. A dual authentication protocol linked to a hashed algorithm that responded to a private key string I had stored offline. The system had been stable for over 2 years, but without that key, it wouldn't push a single live update. The moment hit me like a lightning bolt. They thought they fired a developer. But they actually severed their entire control system. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. Not out of revenge, not yet. I hadn't even thought that far. But because I realized something. They couldn't replace me. Not Wesley. Not Tyler, the 24-year-old code flipper with a flashy GitHub page and a lot of buzzwords. Not the new UI team or the AI consultants or the cloud architecture firm they hired last minute to modernize everything. They had gutted the body and left the brain behind. And I had the one thing they couldn't duplicate, understanding. I thought back to the meetings I'd sat in quietly. The times I'd warned Jacob and Peter about future-proofing. The late nights I spent rebuilding after a crash, sweating bullets over server temperatures and redundancy layers. That knowledge? You couldn't fake it. And now? It was about to become the one thing that could bring the entire company to its knees. I should have felt vindicated. But I felt haunted. Because part of me still believed in what we were building. The original dream. The platform wasn't just code, it was my craft. The structure that held it together wasn't some generic template, it was my signature. But they'd chosen showmanship over substance. Buzzwords over backbone. And now, their future was a house of cards, with me holding the one card they didn't even realize they'd discarded. I looked at the calendar. Friday was the launch celebration. Grand Bridge Convention Center. Live demos, investor showcases, media coverage. That was their big moment. So I decided I'd be there, too. I wasn't going to cause a scene. I wasn't going to shout or destroy anything. I was just going to give Wesley exactly what he asked for. A future without the pathetic, outdated employee he had fired. And let him experience what that future looked like, live. I didn't sleep much that week. Not because I was angry. Because I was calculating. Every hour Wesley spent polishing his speech, I spent refining my plan. Every minute they prepped champagne flutes and press kits, I was running test environments, double-checking code dependencies, and validating every lock I'd built into the production pipeline. I wasn't going to sabotage them. No. That would be petty. Illegal, even. I wasn't going to touch a single live client environment. I was going to do nothing, and that was the brilliance of it. Because without my production deployment key, there was no system. It didn't matter how flashy their slides looked. It didn't matter how many buzzwords Wesley could string together on a stage. When it came time to show the world what they'd built, nothing would launch. I even left everything intact. The sandbox demo, the fake data that mimicked performance, they could keep it. It would run just long enough to give them hope. Just long enough for investors to be impressed. But when Monday morning came, when the clients tried logging in for the first real trial run, all they'd get was a blinking cursor. Locked out. Wesley had cut me loose thinking he was upgrading. But in doing so, he left the company with a hollow shell. And I wasn't going to scream or beg or send angry emails. I wasn't going to threaten them. I was going to show up at their moment of triumph, and offer a gift. I bought a small, elegant black box, like the kind you'd use to present jewelry. Inside, I placed a single USB drive. Labeled clearly. Production deployment key, Christensen Global. No encryption. No malware. No tricks. Just the truth. The one thing Wesley didn't even know he needed. I rehearsed the moment in my mind. The way I'd walk in. Calm. Clean suit. No fanfare. Let him gloat. Let him smile. Let him toast to a future I'd quietly dismantled. And when he tried to show off the product, that's when I'd deliver it. My gift. The moment he'd realize, live, on stage, in front of investors and press, that he didn't control the company. He never had. And I wouldn't have to lift a single finger to bring it all down. I had already built the countdown clock. All I had to do, was watch it hit 0. I printed a fresh guest badge, my access still hadn't been revoked, and rehearsed my lines. Not out of malice. Out of precision. I wasn't doing this to hurt anyone. I was doing it to reclaim what they tried to erase. Friday came quickly. And as the lights dimmed in the convention hall, and Wesley stepped onto that stage to deliver the biggest speech of his career, I walked through the front doors with that little box in my pocket. And the quiet, unstoppable knowledge that I held all the power. The Grand Bridge Convention Center was lit up like a tech gala. Everywhere I turned, spotlights, glass tabletops, velvet ropes. Waiters in tuxedos floated past with shrimp skewers and champagne. Flat screens showcased slides that looped corporate slogans, Innovation Unleashed, and The Future of Data. It was all smoke and mirrors. And I was the man holding the match. No one stopped me as I walked in. No security check. No awkward glance. My name tag still worked, my face still familiar to the staff. I was just another smiling guest at the birth of a revolutionary product. In my pocket, a small black gift box. Inside, the USB key that made everything on those screens real. Or, rather, made it not real, because without it, none of their code could reach the live servers. I lingered near the back wall as Wesley strutted onto the stage in a fitted charcoal suit. Spotlights hit his face like he was a movie star. I could hear the smug in his voice before he even spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we unveil the future of scalable data technology. I watched his every word. Not for what he said, but for when he said my name. Because he did. Of course he did. Some of you may remember Stephen Marlowe, a longtime team member who helped get us started. But to move forward, you sometimes need to let go of the past. Tonight, we celebrate new blood. New leadership. New direction. Polite applause. Investors nodding. Tyler Morrison smirking near the stage. And then, this. To the employees who no longer fit our vision, I hope they find better places to contribute their unique talents. There was a pause. A calculated pause. Then he raised his glass. To the future, and freedom from dead weight. That's when I stepped forward. No yelling. No grandstanding. I walked slowly through the crowd, meeting Wesley's eyes from the floor as his champagne hovered near his lips. He froze for a half second when he saw me. Then tried to recover with a grin. "Stephen," he said into the mic, too surprised to be graceful. "You're here." "Couldn't miss the party," I said, raising my hand with the black gift box. "I brought something. A little keepsake from your past." The crowd stirred. Phones tilted upward. Camera shutters clicked. He had two choices, refuse it and look weak, or accept it and risk whatever came next. His ego chose for him. He stepped off the stage, smoothed his suit, and took the box. "Always dramatic, Stephen." "Always exact," I replied. He opened the box. Saw the USB key. Read the label. And froze. The second his eyes flicked up to meet mine, I saw it. Recognition. Then, panic. He looked past me to the back of the room. His eyes darted to the screen above the stage, which was running their live demo, cached from our internal dev environment, still humming along like everything was perfect. But he understood now. It was fake. And come Monday morning, it would all collapse. Unless he plugged in the key. Unless he admitted, publicly, that I was the one who built the very system he tried to take credit for. "What is this?" he asked under his breath. "It's the one thing your entire empire is missing," I said. "Your future. Or your failure." Then, without another word, I turned and walked out. Behind me, the lights flickered once. The demo screen glitched. Then it went black. I didn't need to look back to know what happened next. The moment the demo screen went dark, I could feel it, like a current running through the room. The champagne bubble had popped. Murmurs turned to panic. Laughter turned to questions. Cell phones came out, not for photos, but to call assistants, CTOs, lawyers. And at the center of it all was Wesley Grant, clutching a USB drive with my initials laser etched on the back. He looked like a groom left at the altar. I stood just outside the convention doors, watching through the glass as chaos bloomed. Reporters scribbled. Investors whispered furiously. And Tyler? He looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. He ran to the stage, talking a mile a minute. We can reboot the systems, maybe a rollback, maybe patch in through the backup tunnel. But I knew better. There was no tunnel. There was no backup. There was only the production server. And without my key, there was nothing. The true moment, the real twist, came not from the demo failing. It came later that night, when Wesley called me. Yes. He actually called me. Not to threaten. Not to gloat. To beg. "Stephen, please," he said. "I didn't know. I wasn't told you had rights to the deployment tools." "You didn't ask," I replied. "You just assumed I was disposable. I'll pay you. We'll bring you back. You can write your own deal." I let the silence hang. Because for the first time, he was the one squirming. "This isn't about money, Wesley," I finally said. "It's about respect. Something you'll never understand." And I hung up. He called again. And again. Over the next 72 hours, Christensen Global unraveled. Investors pulled out. Clients canceled contracts. Tech blogs ran scathing exposés titled "Launch Failure of the Year." But the real blow came from inside. Jacob Torres called me. The original co-founder. The man who used to sit across from me eating microwave burritos in that dingy office over a pizza shop. "I didn't know what Wesley was doing," Jacob said. "I should have paid closer attention. I'm sorry." "You let him erase me, Jacob," I told him. "You didn't just stay silent, you signed off on it." He didn't argue. He just said, quietly, "We're removing him. The board's voting him out. We want you back." And in that moment, the story flipped. The man they fired was now the man they needed. They didn't just offer me a job. They offered me equity, control, respect. But I made one thing clear. If I come back, I build it my way. No ego. No fake visionaries. Just real people. Doing real work. He agreed. And 2 days later, Wesley Grant walked out of Christensen Global for the last time. He never got his moment of glory. But I got something better. Control over the very future he tried to claim. The Monday after Wesley's fall, I walked back into the office I once called home. But it didn't feel the same. It felt quieter. Not because it was empty, but because the noise was gone. The posturing. The politics. The BS meetings where real work got buried beneath buzzwords. Now, there was only purpose. And for the first time in a long time, I was the one shaping it. The board had appointed me interim director of operations, but I didn't take the corner office. I stayed where I had always worked, in the server room. Because that's where the Betrayal Foundation was. And from that day forward, I rebuilt not just the company, but the culture. I rehired the engineers Wesley tossed aside. I brought in the interns who actually cared, the support staff who made magic happen every day without recognition. And Tyler? I gave him a choice, stay and learn, or leave with a reference. To his credit, he stayed. Humbled. And curious. We worked late nights together rebuilding the systems Wesley thought he understood. The platform came back online within 72 hours. Stable. Stronger. Authenticated by the one person who knew its DNA. Clients returned. Investors returned. But Wesley never did. I heard he took a job at a much smaller firm in Atlanta. Something about rebuilding trust. He still wears nice suits. Still smiles in photos. But he never again made the mistake of underestimating the people who actually build things. And me? I didn't stay director forever. Once the company was steady, I stepped aside. Passed the reins to someone who earned it. Not with charisma. But with quiet, relentless competence. Because that's what sustains real companies. Not flash. Not show. Foundation. Looking back, I don't hate Wesley. I pity him. He mistook packaging for product. Style for substance. And most of all, he mistook loyalty for weakness. That night at the launch, he thought he was delivering a knockout blow. But the truth? I wasn't down. I was winding up. He fired me like a villain in his success story. But in the end, he became the footnote in mine. In the end, truth has a way of surfacing, even if it comes twisted through pain and betrayal. As one wise voice once said, sometimes your greatest enemy was once your closest ally. If this story struck a chord with you, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and spread the word, because justice deserves to be heard.